Henry Kendall Thaw. Henry Kendall, born in 1871 in Pennsylvania. Thaw was the heir apparent to a multimillion-dollar fortune and the son of railroad and coal baron William Thaw Sr. even as a young child. Thaw was well known for being unpredictable, exhibiting signs of sleeplessness, nonsensical speech, and tantrums. He was labeled as a troublemaker and dumb by teachers while attending different private schools. In the end, he enrolled at the University of Pittsburgh before moving to Harvard. However, he was expelled afterwards. He didn't spend much time studying in college, choosing instead to indulge in drinking binges and cockfights. Once, despite being on a $2,500 monthly allowance at a period when the average annual pay was about $500, he chased down a cab driver with a shotgun because he felt the man had defrauded him of $10. He was called a playboy and would frequently light cigarettes with $100 bills. After being expelled from Harvard, Thaw was shunned by elites in New York City. He held Stanford White, a well-known architect, responsible for this, claiming that he opposed Thaw's admittance into these exclusive circles. That is, until he saw model Florence Evelyn Nesbit, and his fixation with White only intensified. White and Evelyn have been friends since Evelyn was 15, and when she was about 16, he had raped her while she was asleep, loading her down with alcohol. Thaw was an older, extremely affluent man who greatly pleased Evelyn's mother and headmistress. He would always come to her with presents, cash, and words of appreciation. Eventually, they would travel to Europe together, where he proposed to Evelyn. She refused at first as she knew Thaw was fixated on female virginity, but she later told him the truth about what had transpired with White, which infuriated him. Since Evelyn was no longer a virgin, he believed that White had destroyed Evelyn. 1905 saw the couple's marriage. Evelyn and Thaw, together with a few others, traveled to Madison Square Garden on June 25, 1906, for a show that ended at approximately 11 o'clock at night. White now emerged and sat down at one of the surrounding tables. During the show's finale, Thaw, who had been furious all day, approached White and produced a gun. He shot White 3 times from 2 feet away. He didn't try to get away from the scene or take credit for the architect's death. Instead, he stood over his corpse afterwards, saying, "I did it because he ruined my wife," instead. Nevertheless, other witnesses assert that he might have spoken life instead of wife. He had it coming to him, he continued. After taking advantage of the girl, he left her behind. Thaw was refused bail after being accused of first-degree murder. He slept on a brass bed rather than a regular prison cot, had his meals made by his favorite restaurants while he was incarcerated awaiting trial, dressed in custom clothing rather than the prison uniform, and was permitted to drink champagne and wine. In the days after the murder, he was said to have been overjoyed, and he later claimed to have heard the voices of young girls in heaven calling out to him. This, he believed, was a sign of heavenly blessing. Thaw's mother, who had been defending the family reputation for years by settling lawsuits brought by her son, hired the top defense attorney available, which would have cost the family $750,000 in today's currency. When Mrs. Thaw's lawyers thought that would be the best defense, they first insisted that her son not be stigmatized by clinical lunacy. Thus, the two came to an agreement whereby Thaw would claim temporary insanity. It's been said that Miss Thaw's son inherited her family's history of mental illness. He had physically and sexually abused Evelyn throughout the years, had a tendency to seduce victims into a place where he could restrain and physically abuse them. His sexual desires have been described as sadistic. Tens of thousands of dollars had been used to buy the silence of the victims. Thaw's first trial ended with a deadlocked jury. January 1908 saw the start of his second trial, which continued until February 1st, when he was judged not guilty by reason of insanity and given a life sentence in the Fishkill, New York-based Mattawan State Hospital for the criminally insane, despite the fact that his exceptional riches gave him access to benefits that regular patients could not. After being placed there, His legal team worked to have him declared sane. In 1915, a trial was held to ascertain his sanity, and he was declared sane and allowed to return to society. Thaw was accused of kidnapping, beating, and sexually abusing Frederick Gump, a 19-year-old, just a year later. Thaw tried to kill himself after bribing the Gump family and left Philadelphia. After being committed to a mental hospital once more, he was eventually found to be sane once more and was freed in 1924. In 1947, Thaw passed away in Miami, Florida, from a heart attack. His age was 76. He was buried in Pittsburgh and left Evelyn the modern equivalent of about $121,000 of his $12 million wealth. If you're fascinated by true crime and enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up to stay updated on all our latest content. Moving on to the next case. Patricia Carnahan. The body of an unnamed woman was discovered in a state park in 1979. The case remained unsolved for many years. It wasn't until 2023 that important breakthroughs, such as improvements in forensic science and interstate cooperation, gave fresh insight into the enduring enigma and led to the attacker's prosecution. The date was September 28, 1979. At the Sugar Pine Point State Park campground on Lake Tahoe, a woman's body was found. She looked as though she had been strangled and had been severely battered and wounded. She was wearing some jewelry and was probably in her early 40s. She carried a wristwatch, a necklace of a deer, and a few rings. The three individuals who found her dead did not contact the police right away. Rather, they made a call to a nearby newspaper and disappeared. After that, the reporter notified law enforcement. Due to outstanding arrest warrants, police discovered that the three guys had neglected to report their discovery. For this particular offense, they were all exonerated. Remarkably, an autopsy would show that Jane Doe was probably still alive when they found her. She was subjected to an SA kit test since it seemed like she had been abused. To gather evidence, these kits include sterile containers, combs, microscope slides, collection bags, and other items. With the aid of these kits, victims' hairs, saliva, blood, and other bodily fluids are removed in order to establish the assault and identify the culprit. It was discovered that she had taken significant hits to her body, and there were defensive wounds that showed she had retaliated. Around the picnic area on the western side of the lake, there were several indications of fighting, and the victim misplaced one of her flip-flops in her attempt to flee her attacker. The investigating cops spotted an empty beer bottle beside the body, which they mistakenly bagged despite finding very little other evidence. Forensic technology was not as developed in 1979 as it is now. The body was kept for a very long time in the morgue, and the evidence was filed away. The decision was made to bury the unidentified woman in an unmarked grave in a potter's field in El Dorado County, since no one came forward to claim her. As it was then, Lake Tahoe has always been a well-liked vacation spot. People from all over the world constantly flocked to the beaches and campsites, so it was challenging to find this woman. She can be from wherever. There was no way to find out who she was or how she got there at the time because police did not find a car or any other possessions. Due to technological limitations, it was deemed a cold case and was withdrawn from consideration. The victims and the beer bottle's DNA were examined years later, in 1986, when the technology of DNA testing was developed. It was evident the attacker owned the bottle, but until decades later, nothing more was done. In 2014, investigating officer John Gaines took up this case, some 36 years after it began. He reopened Jane Doe's files from Lake Tahoe. It opened cases from the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s as part of El Dorado County's cold case unit. He dug out the body in the Jane Doe case at Lake Tahoe. In an effort to identify her, he printed pictures of her jewelry to be distributed to the public while accompanied by a forensic anthropologist from California State University, Chico. Local publications ran the photos, but there were few leads. Gaines took attention of the necklace and discovered that the deer necklace was actually a high pendant, symbolic of the Jewish life emblem. According to him, Elvis Presley used to wear a pendant similar to this while performing. Gaines tried his luck with the local Jewish community using a high pendant as a lead. Rabbi Morty Rickler, a local rabbi in Lake Tahoe who had recently opened a Chabad center, expressed surprise when police contacted him. Since the Chabad is seen as a Jewish community center, cops are not frequently seen there. It is a sacred location of tranquility and purity. After hearing the details of the situation, Rabbi Rickler was eager to assist and inform the neighborhood. When the body was found in 1979, very few Jewish families had recently moved to the Lake Tahoe region. Over 1,000 Jews lived in the region, and there were now 2 synagogues. 3 plainclothes officers with firearms and badges paid Rabbi Yossi Grossbaum a visit in September 2015. Gaines arrived in Folsom, California, hoping to make contact with the victim's living relatives. In Northern California and throughout the state, Rabbi Grossbaum disseminated the information. Eventually, a family identified the pendant in the press and stepped forward. The claimed victim's daughter and the remains underwent a DNA test, and the results showed a match. Patricia Carnahan, who would have been 35 years old at the time of her death, was eventually identified as the body. Patricia, who was originally from Virginia, had left on a solitary road trip through California. She had a red Volkswagen bus under her belt. She never made it home, despite having called her family to let them know she was on her way. In October 1979, a month later, the family filed a missing persons report. Her vehicle was retrieved from a Venice, California dealership. It appeared that the car had been left unattended in the lot. Regretfully, no connection was established because she was a Virginia missing persons case. In addition, the perpetrator's DNA and Patricia's DNA profile were deposited into CODIS, the FBI's unified DNA system. But no one could match that for many more years. After that, her body was given to her family so they could bury her properly, and 26 years after her tragic death, she was placed to rest. But the offender continued to be at large. Years later, the attacker was apprehended due to a totally different series of events. The Washington State SAKIT initiative, which sought to reactivate abuse inquiry testing from the 1970s onward in an effort to apprehend the offenders, received financing from the state of Washington in 2023. One of the few police departments with full-time personnel dedicated to abuse probe test cases was the Spokane Police Department. More than 250 of the more than 1,500 kits in the SPD were matched using the combined DNA index approach. This resulted in an enormous discovery. A man in Spokane was charged in 1994 of having his way with a homeless woman. She sent the police a complaint on the occurrence, had herself tested to confirm her allegation, and designated Harold Carpenter as the person who had attacked her. He was arrested for coercing her against her will in the second degree, but the woman chose not to pursue legal action, therefore the case was dropped. Harold Carpenter asserted that he did not defile her, and that their relationship was consensual. His word was therefore in opposition to hers. The test kit was uploaded into CODIS after being filed away. The DNA on the system matched Patricia Carnahan's body and the empty beer bottles, but the woman who had filed the complaint had long ago passed away. After more research, Carpenter was identified as being close to the incident on September 29, 1979, when he was detained for driving under the influence in Susanville, California. In addition to being charged for a second non-consensual event involving a woman in 1994, Carpenter was arrested for a number of misdemeanors between 1990 and 1993. Prior to his divorce in 1998, he was married and resided in Sandpoint. She had accused him of domestic abuse. He was charged with possession of illegal narcotics, reckless driving, multiple DUIs, and disturbing the peace in Bonner County between 1998 and 2018. Other than one DUI in 2000, he didn't have anything on file in Washington. After being made homeless in 2016, Carpenter moved to Spokane Street. He was detained as a suspect in a different non-consensual case in Spokane County in 2018. However, the allegations were not validated. His homelessness was discussed in an article that appeared in the Inlander in 2020. "You simply got through it. Simply step outside and attempt to avoid the snow, rain, or other elements. He was under suspicion for an alleged groping incident in 2022, but once more, no arrest was made. He relocated to Spokane's downtown Park Tower apartments. El Dorado County investigators now had a reason to make an arrest of him, and the Spokane Police Department assisted in Carpenter's whereabouts. The 63-year-old was apprehended on March 1, 2023, for the murder of Patricia Carnahan, and he was brought to justice as a result of the cooperation of multiple states' agencies. The Spokane case was not pursued because of the statute of limitations, and no charges were brought against him in that specific case. He is being held in Spokane County Jail without bond while he waits to be extradited to El Dorado so that he can face charges for his actions. The long-running cold case was eventually solved. Thanks to forensic technology advancements and cross-state agency cooperation, Patricia Carnahan's attacker was identified 44 years later. Nearly 50 years later, the mystery surrounding the 1979 Lake Tahoe Jane Doe has been solved. Moving on to the next case. Sabrina Underwood. Nestled in the northwestern Arkansas Ozark Mountains, Huntsville, Arkansas, was a small, tight-knit rural town in the 1990s. The town was a place where community ties were strong and life proceeded at a slower pace compared to larger urban regions. Its character was profoundly anchored in its historical and agricultural traditions. Throughout the 1990s, Huntsville's community life was characterized by a strong sense of solidarity. Locals were frequently acquainted, and the town's social fabric was knitted by a variety of neighborhood activities. Every year, the people of Huntsville eagerly anticipated the town fairs, parades, and festivals. These events gave participants a chance to socialize and cement their ties to the community in addition to offering entertainment. This rustic setting served as the setting for the tragic story of Sabrina Underwood. On January 20th, 1991, Sabrina Underwood, then 19 years old, vanished from sight after her mother let her off at the U.S. Highway 41262 in Boone County, close to Bear Creek. At the time, Sabrina was traveling to Calico Rock to see her boyfriend who was serving time in jail. The neighborhood was shocked by Sabrina's abduction, and her mother never saw her again. There were months of tense anticipation after Sabrina vanished. Then, on April 8, 1991, a somber finding stunned the town. A hunter discovered human remains close to the Gum Springs Cemetery, northwest of Little Rock, along with hair, underwear, and an ear stud. It was determined that the bones belonged to Sabrina Underwood, whose destiny was very different from what she had intended to accomplish. The cause of Sabrina's death was initially ruled as unknown, which sparked a laborious and devastating investigation. Law enforcement agents put in a great deal of effort in interviewing suspects, following up on leads, and trying to piece together the details of her case. Their diligent work went unrewarded as the case eventually fizzled out, leaving Huntsville under a cloud of unanswered mystery for years to come. The darkness would not lift for over 30 years. A crucial tip surfaced in July 2022, launching the probe once more. A startling and unsettling confession letter was in the possession of a local lawyer whose client was serving time in an Arkansas state prison. When his estranged wife Kirsty Headley was killed in 2018, the client, Rick Allen Headley, was already serving a life sentence. The confession letter gave the long-abandoned case new life by revealing graphic details of Sabrina Underwood's terrible demise. Rick Allen Headley was questioned by detectives right away regarding the contents of the confession letter. His shocking information would throw light on the horrific crime that had been hidden for almost 30 years. Headley confessed to the crime, and his account read like a terrifying story that had come to pass in the sleepy town of Huntsville. Headley's admission, according to the affidavit, gave a bleak impression of Sabrina's last moments. At a gas stop, he said, Sabrina approached him and asked for a ride. Headley would be plagued by the events of that ride for years to come. In a startling change of events, Sabrina approached Headley and startlingly demanded money, threatening to harm him if he rejected her advances. Headley told a terrifying story of the events leading up to Sabrina's terrible end. Following their sexual session in his truck, Sabrina told him she would require a large payment from him or she would disclose that he had hurt her. Hedley was taken aback by this news and realized that trouble was ahead. The subsequent occurrences were really terrifying. Though the seriousness of the situation weighed hard on him, Hedley made the decision to leave Sabrina behind and drive away. He felt that he had to prevent her from ruining his life. At this time, he attacked her outside the truck with great violence. He carried her into a little graveyard that was concealed from onlookers' gaze in a startling and gory act. The account of the actual slaughter is really frightening. Hedley admitted to severing Sabrina's neck with a Rambo-style knife that had a compass attached at the end. He gave a vivid account of how he snapped the bone and removed her head from her body by hammering on the knife blade with a rock. He said that his goal was to make sure Sabrina never found out what had happened to her. After doing this horrific deed, Hedley hid Sabrina's body from sight by covering it with logs and foliage. Then he collected her possessions and put them close to her body. The knife and rock used in the horrific act were thrown into a stretch of woods many miles distant. Hedley took off his blood-stained clothes at his mountain home apartment, threw them in a garbage bag, and showered to rid himself of Sabrina's blood. His garments were in the garbage bag that was thrown in the dumpster behind the mall. Hedley then walked out of the place. In addition to sending shockwaves across Huntsville, Hedley's confession gave Sabrina's family, who had suffered through decades of suffering and uncertainty, some degree of comfort and closure. A much-needed turning point in the pursuit of justice in the unsolved Sabrina Lynn Underwood case has been reached with the apprehension of Rick Allen Hedley. He is currently being charged in relation to Sabrina's case, and the community is eagerly awaiting his anticipated court appearance in Fulton County Circuit Court in late November 2023. The case serves as a sobering reminder of both the small-town community's unwavering spirit and the police enforcement's unwavering loyalty. Moving on to the next case. Shelley Warner. Imagine a small town in the summer of 1980 where everyone was laughing and life seemed to go on without a hitch. However, in the heart of this town, called Mishawaka, a terrible tragedy occurred that would haunt the residents for the rest of their lives. Shelley Warner, at 15 years old, vanished from sight on June 15, 1980, leaving her family devastated. Her lifeless body with a gunshot wound to the head was discovered next to the Madison Road Railroad tracks 10 agonizing days later. In a quiet village, how could such a horrific act take place? Who may have committed this heinous act? The bustling commercial city of Mishawaka, in northern Indiana, has a certain charm all its own. Thanks to Penn Township's ideal location along the St. Joseph River in St. Joseph County, everyday life is set against a breathtaking backdrop. With a population of roughly 51,000, the city is delighted to be called the Princess City. In Mishawaka, new residential subdivisions and established neighborhoods coexist. The city was carefully designed to promote a strong sense of community and connectedness. The people there are well known for their generosity, camaraderie, and mutual love of adventure. A horrific incident that irrevocably ruined Mishawaka's tranquility and etched its name in the annals of tragedy occurred even in this close-knit community. On July 4, 1964, Shelley Warner was born, although not much is known about her early life. She shared a home in Mishawaka, Indiana, with her mother, Kathleen Warner. Following the split of her parents, Shelley was raised by her mother. Her mother was an elementary school teacher in the neighborhood. At the tender age of 15, Shelley enrolled at Mishawaka High School, where she played sports and sang in the band. She was single and had no enemies that she was aware of. Young Shelley had a bright future ahead of her and was motivated to achieve her objectives. She was optimistic and lively. At the moment, Shelley was brimming with youthful energy and enthusiasm for life's possibilities. She had no idea that fate had other ideas for her. Mishawaka's quiet routine was upended on June 16, 1980, by an occurrence that would leave the community irrevocably traumatized. Shelley Warner, a 15-year-old Mishawaka high school student, started out on what was meant to be a normal day. She drove her 1973 Volkswagen 2 miles to the nearest Wilkes grocery, wishing her mother Kathleen a fond farewell. Time passed, and there was an eerie calm surrounding the Warner residence. Shelley hasn't returned to her house in more than an hour. Kathleen quickly began to experience terror and anxiety. Kathleen waited a little longer till she was forced to phone the police due to her desperation. Her voice faltered when she told the authorities about her daughter's disappearance. At first, the Mishawaka Police Department handled the case as a missing persons case because they believed it included a young runaway. But as time passed, a horrifying insight became clear. After a torturous 24 hours, Shelley was still nowhere to be found. As their degree of concern grew, investigators quickly modified the investigation status to suspected abduction. There were no overt indicators of foul play, which left detectives perplexed in those early hours of desperation. Kathleen's first call was reported as a regular missing person, but nothing had changed by the next day. Mishawaka town was now under the shadow of suspicion, setting the stage for an unsettling mystery that would unfold over many years. Following an immediate inquiry, the authorities learned that Shelley had arrived to Wilt's supermarket on June 16th of that year. At approximately 1:30 p.m., she was seen shopping for groceries, and at approximately 2 p.m., she was seen exiting the store. She made her way to her car, which was parked roughly 50 feet from the store's entrance. But things took a turn for the worst as soon as she got into her car. A man with blonde hair, who appeared to be between 16 and 18 years old, with a height of 5'7" and a weight of approximately pound 130, was observed skulking around the shop. The young man allegedly approached Shelley's automobile further closely, according to witnesses. Abruptly, he took over the driving and shoved Shelley into the passenger seat. They claimed that Shelley looked taken aback by the abrupt intrusion. The witnesses could only see the man's back. As a result, it was difficult to tell if Shelley was in danger or if someone was using a weapon to silence her. Shelley was in the passenger seat when the man quickly drove off. It was an astonishing and frightening conduct that left bystanders perplexed. Anxious family members and friends launched a big collective hunt to see if anyone might learn anything about the missing little child. Authorities issued a drawing of the first suspect based on the witness's statement in an attempt to enlist the public's assistance. A terrible discovery made a few hours later made them even more afraid of the unknown. Shelley's automobile was discovered abandoned in the parking lot of the neighboring OSS Shoal, Indiana shopping center. There was no trace of a scuffle inside the car, and Shelley was not present. As investigators attempted to piece together what had transpired, they kept looking for information. Two young females were exploring a wooded region outside of South Bend, Indiana, after 10 days of suffering and frustration when they saw an awful sight. A young woman's half-nude body was discovered in a ditch next to the railroad tracks. The young lady was later identified as Shelley Warner by dental records. It was evident from the scene that she had died there. 2 close-range shots in her were fired with a large-caliber gun. The investigation was a crazy journey with lots of leads and no leads. Hypnosis was the final desperate measure the police took in their quest for answers. For witnesses from the grocery shop were put under hypnosis in the hopes that they might recall important details regarding Shelley's kidnapping. The first suspect was given a fresh sketch after these hypnosis sessions, which revealed that he had been dropped off at the business and looked to be hitchhiking. Prior to entering the store, Shelley was allegedly observed talking to 2 young women by the witnesses. However, no one was aware of the identities of those 2 women or their potential connection to Shelley's kidnapping. Every attempt was made by law enforcement to capture the criminal. However, they were not successful. Many men who fit the description were taken in by the police. However, none of them could be recognized in a lineup as the kidnapper. Because neither the man who dropped off the suspect nor the 2 young women Shelley had spoken to could be found, the authorities were frustrated and the case remained unresolved. The ledge eventually dried up, ending the inquiry. The murder of Shelley had long puzzled the investigators. Her cause of death remained a mystery, and she appeared to be an ordinary high school student. It's interesting to note that witnesses claimed Shelley seemed shocked when the man got into her car. It was impossible to rule out the idea that she knew who killed her. Shelley Warner's kidnapping and murder soon became a cold case. a long-hanging, terrible mystery that plagued Mishawaka. The investigation was taken over by the Cold Case Division of the Mishawaka Police Department following the ST. In late 2021, the Joseph County Metro Homicide Unit was dissolved. Their mission was to solve the riddle that had troubled them for years. With time, Shelley Warner's unsolved murder has cast a long shadow. However, a significant witness came forward in April 2023, 43 years later, throwing new light on the horrifying case and offering a ray of hope in the shadows. At last, the witness, a woman who had been silent out of fear for her family's safety, missed her opportunity to speak up. This witness had been intimidated by the suspect. In order to solve the case, detectives Dave Dossman, Tim Corbett, and Sam Walsh worked non-stop, according to Jim Campbell. The testimony of the witness was a paradigm-shifting discovery. She identified the 3 people in charge of killing Shelley, but the authorities withheld their identities. It was shocking to learn that Shelley knew very little about these individuals. Since they were older than she was, she most likely only knew their family. However, the authorities have not disclosed the reason for her injuries or the perpetrator. 2 of the suspects died over the years. The fact that one had died in 2001, the second had also perished in 2010, and the third had vanished into thin air had not previously been known to the detectives. The inquiry into Shelley's kidnapping and subsequent murder was reopened as a result of this new information. When investigators looked more closely into the past of the 3 individuals, they discovered a horrible history of violence. Confirming the first witness report, these men seem to have played a direct role in the untimely death of Shelley. The witness only felt safe talking to the authorities after 2 of the accused had died. The police eventually found out. For the aim of investigating unresolved homicide cases like Shelley's, the Mishawaka Police Department established a cold case team in January 2022, consisting of former South Bend homicide detectives. This team worked very hard to locate further witnesses and gather evidence to back up the initial witness statement. However, upon closer inspection, they learned that the 3rd suspect died in 2018. The fact that 3 men were implicated in Shelley and Warner's kidnapping and murder was a significant revelation. It demonstrated the importance of a witness' bravery in coming forward almost 40 years after the horrific event. The witness was motivated by the fact that 2 of the suspects had died and the 3rd had disappeared. The fear and intimidation these suspects had used over the years to conceal crucial information added to the anguish of Shelley's family and the neighborhood. Cold case investigator Jim Campbell discussed the difficulties witnesses faced and how family intimidation had suppressed their testimony. Despite the fact that the 3 suspects' involvement was clearly shown by the investigators' testimony and evidence, there was a significant issue that was unavoidable. Since all 3 suspects had already passed away, how could the investigators carry out their investigation and provide Shelley's family with closure and justice? The St. Joseph County Prosecutor's Office reviewed the evidence and declared it conclusive, closing the case. It did not take long to realize that the dead could not face legal repercussions. Aside from their age and acquaintance with Shelley, not much information was available regarding the suspects. However, the St. Joseph County Prosecutor's Office ruling provided resolution. Though the suspects were deceased, there was optimism that the truth would come to light and Shelley's family could finally rest in peace. The witness's vital knowledge set off a coincidental chain of events that resulted in additional witnesses and evidence. The St. Joseph County Prosecutor's Office stated that although DNA testing was unable to produce a conclusive match, other evidence and statements were vital. Unfortunately, because of their demise, the suspects' identities remain a mystery, making it impossible to press charges. Ultimately, individuals dedicated to attaining justice had not allowed the passing of time to erode their determination. The murder of Shelley Warner had been solved because of the investigators' perseverance and the bravery of a witness who stepped forward to reveal a terrible chapter in Mishawaka's past. The verdict in the Shelley Warner case caused a spectrum of feelings in those who were directly engaged. The investigators who had toiled for years to sit with Lee in order to find the truth found some solace in the case's ending. Tim Corbett, One of the cold case investigators remarked, "I hope she's sitting next to God. I am grateful to the police, the public, and all those who assisted with the case." Even still, there remained a persistent sense of sadness until the case's end. Family members of Shelley remained silent about the updates since they were understandably private in their loss. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you believe that justice has actually been done? Share your opinions with us in the comments section. Moving on to the next case. Sophie Duplantier. Paris, France was home to 39-year-old documentary producer Sophie Duplantier. She captivated everyone she came into contact with her intelligence and beauty. Her complexion was as pale as porcelain, yet her hair was a fiery gold. Her radiant grin shone under the lights of the events she attended, and the numerous paparazzi cameras that bordered the premieres and high society parties she was invited to immortalize her breathtaking image. When Sophie first met Daniel Duplantier, she was raising her kid from a previous marriage alone. In the French film industry, Daniel was a well-known and renowned film producer. In 1988, Sophie and him were romantically involved after meeting at work. Although Daniel and Sophie had already been married twice and were 16 years apart, they connected intellectually and shared similar passions and interests in work. On June 18, 1991, Daniel and Sophie were married. Whereas Sophie desired a much simpler and more secluded life, Daniel led a life full with premieres and parties. Sophie fell in love with Ireland's scenery during her multiple visits there as a teenager. To get away from her hectic socialite life, Sophie purchased a vacation property in Shoal, Ireland, in 1993, close to Tormore, West Cork. She selected a rather remote house. On windy days, its windows and doors rattled, and it lacked light and heating. She would frequently spend the holidays with her kid at this remote house. Sophie made the decision to take a vacation by plane to Ireland on December 19, 1996. She requested a few friends and family members to go with her, but as Christmas was quickly approaching, nobody was available, so she made the decision to travel alone. On December 20, 1996, she landed in Ireland early and leased a Ford Fiesta to go to her vacation house in Tormore, West Cork. She intended to spend a few days there before spending Christmas in Paris. She made a stop at a Texaco gas station en route to her residence in order to get wood for starting a fire. After that, she went to Scholl's Courtyard Bar and had lunch there between 3:30 and 4 p.m., after which she drove home. She called the housekeeper as soon as she got there to speak with her. She brought goods into town the following day and took out cash from the ATM. About 4:30 p.m., she made her way back to her home. When last seen, she was outside her residence. She is thought to have spent the rest of the day at the house. She tried to reach Daniel in France later that night, but he did not answer. But he gave her a call back at about 11 at night. Daniel reported that their chat was fairly amicable and that Sophie appeared to be unfazed. On December 22nd, the next day, she went to the Dunlow ruins at Three Castles Head. She went to see a friend later that day and told her about the woman she had seen at the ruins, who had really startled her. Sophie had stated, "Oh my God, I saw a woman like a white shape," according to her acquaintance. The people in the area think Sophie had seen the Lady of the Lake. The Lady of the Lake is an urban legend that claims to be a ghost that haunts the castle ruins and that seeing her will cause death in a matter of hours. On December 23, 1996, at approximately 10 in the morning, Sophie's corpse would be discovered in the laneway next to her vacation house. Shirley Foster, a neighbor, made the discovery of her. Sophie was discovered with her boots, lycra leggings, and white top on. Her clothing became entangled in the barbed wire encircling her residence. Her murder had been terrible. Her hands and arms were covered in several defensive wounds. She had likely been struck with a fire poker, as she had sustained significant injuries to her head and upper chest. She had sustained serious facial and head injuries. Sophie was found lying on the ground, and a concrete block that looked like it had been dropped on her head was discovered at the murder site. Her body was surrounded by a pool of blood, and the middle gate nearby had bloodstains on it. Police entered the house and discovered it to be unaltered. There was not the slightest indication of a break-in. It appeared that someone had visited Sophie that evening because her bed was not made and 2 wine glasses were left to dry on the draining board next to the kitchen sink. An expert in fingerprints attempted to remove fingerprints from wine glasses and other household items, but the attempt was unsuccessful. Other than Sophie's fingerprint, the expert was unable to locate any others. Between Sophie's fingernails, there were hair strands stained with blood. Nonetheless, forensic examination identified the blood and hair as belonging to Sophie. Oddly, not a single bit of DNA evidence was discovered by the police at the crime scene. The house's front and rear doors were latching and closed when the police arrived. The laneway's massive gate was ajar, despite the fact that the neighbors claimed Sophie typically kept it locked. According to the police, Sophie was attacked inside her house, but she managed to flee and make her way outdoors, where she attempted to scale a fence but got tangled in the barbed wire. This allowed her assassin enough time to track her down and execute her with brutality. Since Sophie's body was discovered close to Briars, authorities think the murderer may have suffered injuries and may have had markings or scratches on his hands and face. Over the following few days, police conducted questionnaires about the murder and conducted door-to-door interviews with residents. Over the course of the inquiry, 50 suspects would be eliminated in total. A local business owner named Marie Farrell reported to the police on December 27, 1996, that she had seen Sophie in her store on December 21st, sometime about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Marie reported seeing a man with an extremely long black coat standing outside her store. She claimed that the man followed Sophie out of the store. A lady calling police under the alias Fiona made contact with them on January 11, 1997. She informed them that the night Sophie was killed, at around 3 in the morning, she had spotted a man by Kelfala Bridge. Sophie's house is only 2.6 kilometers away from Kelfala Bridge. The woman ended the call without providing any more details. The call was traced to a public phone booth by the police. Fiona was asked to get in touch with the police on January 20th in order to provide them with any information on the individual she had seen near Kelfala Bridge. Fiona reported her sighting to the police over the phone the next day. Once more, the call was made from a payphone. Fiona called the police again on January 24th, this time letting them know that she was unable to meet with them to discuss the sighting. However, when authorities followed the call this time, they discovered that Marie Farrell's house was the source. Marie Farrell, the proprietor of the shop, who had reported seeing a man in a long black coat pursuing Sophie, was Fiona. She explained to police that she didn't want to make a public statement because the night she saw the man on the bridge, she was with another man, and she didn't want her husband to find out. She added that there was a man on the bridge who was swinging his arms wildly and looked to be intoxicated. Afterwards, she claimed to have seen the man once more in January at a nearby store, and she had identified him to the police. They found out that Ian Bailey was the man she had indicated. Journalist Ian Bailey resides in Shoal, Ireland. He relocated to Shoal in 1991 from Manchester, England, where he had been born and raised. Bailey met Welsh artist Jules Thomas while working as a freelance journalist. Bailey moved into Liskia, Shoal, to live with Jules. Bailey allegedly had a history of abusing Jules at home, and in 2001, he was found guilty of assault. The first journalist to arrive at Sophie's crime scene was Bailey. At 1:40 p.m., Bailey received a call concerning the murder of a foreign nationalist from Eddie Cassidy, a reporter for the Irish Examiner. Despite the fact that there were a lot of foreign nationalists residing in West Cork at the time, it is said that Bailey and Jules went directly to the location of the crime. A witness claims that Bailey had informed them, at approximately 11:45 p.m. that day, that he was covering a French woman's murder. Later, when questioned about how he knew the victim was French at the time, neither the police nor the media were aware of this. Barley replied that Eddie Cassidy had informed him that the victim was a French woman. When questioned, Eddie Cassidy said that he had merely informed him that the deceased was a foreign nationalist, and that he was unaware of the victim's nationality at the time. Bailey wrote several stories about the case in the days that followed. He said in the papers that the woman had several male partners in France, and that it was probable that one of them had killed her. He also revealed facts about the crime scene that the general public was unaware of. It seems as though he directed the inquiry from West Cork to France. Furthermore, in the days following the murder, a number of witnesses claimed to have seen Bailey with numerous scratches on his arms. Bailey claimed that he had cut down a Christmas tree, which is what caused the scratches. He claimed to have gotten up to the top of a pine tree, saw the top fall off, and scratched his arms trying to bring it down the tree. In addition, Bailey claimed to have acquired a scratch on his forehead while murdering 3 turkeys. Bailey and Jules were taken into custody on February 10th in connection with Sophie Duplantier's murder. When asked where he had been, he told police that the previous evening he had gone to a nearby pub with Jules and had arrived home at around 12:30 in the morning. After that, he said, he went to bed and slept till the next morning. At first, Jules confirmed his account. Jules later claimed, though, that Bailey might have gotten out of bed an hour or so later. When Jules visited him again at 9 in the morning, she reported that he had a new scratch on his forehead. Bailey then asserted that he had gotten out of bed, but it was only at 4 in the morning, and that he had spent 30 minutes writing an article before going back to sleep. Afterwards, Bailey and Jules were freed from custody with no charges. Later on, several people would come forward to claim that Bailey had admitted to killing Sophie. On February 4th, Malachi Reed, a youngster, reported to the police that Bailey had claimed to have killed Sophie, stating that he had, quote, gone up there with a rock and bashed her effing brains out, while giving him a lift home. When Bailey admitted to killing Sophie in 1998 while out drinking with Richie and Rosie Shelley, he said, I did it. I completed it. I overreached myself. Bailey was detained once more in 1998 in connection with Sophie's murder, but this time he was not prosecuted. Marie Farrell testified for the newspapers in a 2003 libel trial, proving that Bailey was the man she saw on the bridge. Following that, Marie claimed Bailey harassed her, and in 2004 Bailey threatened to take Marie to court if she did not take back her statement. Retraction of the statement and admission of coercion by the police to misidentify Bailey as the man she saw on the Kayafata Bridge were the highlights of Marie's 2005 statement. Bailey's arrest warrant was issued in 2010 by a French magistrate. However, in 2012 and again in 2017, the Irish Supreme Court rejected his request for extradition. A French court tried Bailey absentee in 2019. On May 31st, 2019, Bailey was found guilty of murder and given a 25-year prison term. Bailey has not been charged in Ireland with Sophie's murder despite multiple arrests because there is insufficient evidence connecting him to the crime. Bailey still maintains his innocence and resides in West Cork. The case is still open. Moving on to the next case. Suzanne Morphew. In 2020, 49-year-old Suzanne Morphew, her husband Barry Morphew, and their 2 daughters, Macy and Mallory, resided in Colorado. Suzanne rode her bike near Maysville, Colorado, on May 10th. Her neighbor reported her missing to the police when she failed to return home. Her bike was the only item discovered in the forested region where Suzanne had gone bicycling, but she was nowhere to be seen. Shortly after her disappearance on May 17th, Barry made a heartfelt plea on Facebook, promising to do everything it takes to get her back. Oh, Suzanne, please, if someone hears this and knows that you are out there, let us know, and we will do everything in our power to get you back. Your girls need you, and we love and miss you. Not a single question was raised. I'll do whatever it takes to get you back, no matter how much they demand it. I adore you, honey. I really want you back. The investigation was worked on by more than 70 investigators from several agencies. They followed up on over 1,400 tips, conducted over 400 interviews, and executed 135 search warrants. He was also charged with tampering with evidence and attempting to influence a public official, even though the case had gone cold at one time. Barry is being held without bond at the Chaffee County Detention Facility. Though her body has not yet been located, Chaffee County Sheriff Jones Beasley claims they have sufficient evidence that Barry killed his wife. Unfortunately, Authorities are unable to provide a reason for Barry's crime or explain what led them to charge him. John said, "Today is not a day to celebrate, nor does it signal the conclusion of this investigation. Instead, it's the next phase of our extremely challenging but crucial quest for justice for Suzanne and her family." He expressed gratitude to Linda Stanley, the 11th Judicial District Attorney, the FBI, and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation for their contributions to cracking the case. Suzanne's sister expressed her gratitude to the police and thanked them. "For my sister, justice is finally starting today. It has been a journey no one ever thought they would undertake. We do know, for example, that on the day his wife vanished, Barry was staying at a hotel in Broomfield, Colorado. He smelled of chlorine and was drenched from damp towels when he mysteriously exited the room. Barry made nearly $1 million when he sold the house he shared with Suzanne. He purchased a 2-acre property in Salida, Colorado, a few weeks after Suzanne vanished, and he sold it in February 2021. The site was searched in November 2020 after Andrew, Suzanne's brother, paid $18,000 for the search. When cadaver dogs were employed, they were able to detect the smell of human remains. Linda Stanley, the district attorney, was also instrumental in advancing the case to its current state. She said something like this: "This day is dedicated to Suzanne, her family, and everyone who had the pleasure of getting to know, love, and care for her. These are the only information that have been made public thus far. However, it appears that the perpetrator is currently in jail." Thomas Gilbert. On January 4, 2015, New York's elite society was taken aback by 911 calls. Wall Street hedge fund manager Thomas Gilbert, 70, was shot and killed in his own home. The fact that his own son, Thomas "Tommy" Gilbert Jr., 31, killed him rather than some random invader made the case even more horrifying. Tommy's mother, Shelley, discovered her husband bleeding out from a gunshot wound to the head. That was all that remained. How could this have happened? Did the father and son have a strained relationship, or was there a deeper reason behind this? After 2 exhausting rounds of tennis at the River Club, Thomas Gilbert was unwinding at his East Side Manhattan home just 3 days after New Year's Day 2015. His 65-year-old wife Shelley was using her laptop to communicate with pals while he was unwinding in his bedroom and watching a football game. Around 3:15 p.m., the front doorbell went off. Shelley was shocked to see her son had dropped by unexpectedly when she answered the door. Tommy stood there with a duffel bag in his hand and a hoodie on after 5 months without speaking. It should be noted that Tommy's relationship with his father had not always been harmonious. Tommy had no desire to take over the family business, despite his father's wishes. But when Shelley finally saw him that day, she was filled with joy and optimism that their long-standing disagreement may be resolved. Tommy informed his mother that he wanted to meet his father so they could discuss business, and she wishes he had been there for that alone. Tommy asked Shelley if his younger sister Bess was home as he was strolling into the apartment, but she told him she was at church. Tommy went on to say that he was hungry and asked his mother to get him a sandwich and a Coke from the supermarket. In order for him to have ample time alone with his father, he asked her to return in an hour. Shelley offered to make the sandwich alone because she wasn't sure she should leave them together, but Tommy insisted she had to leave. Shelley sensed something wasn't right with her son as she was tying her shoes for her evening out, but in the end, she made the decision to go. But soon after leaving the apartment, she couldn't get rid of the uneasy sensation. So Shelley went back to her apartment building and rode the elevator to the 8th story to make sure everything was all right rather than going to the store. But by the time she came back, Tommy had vanished, leaving a terrifying scene in his wake. Thomas Gilbert, her spouse, had been fatally shot by gunfire. His head was bleeding profusely, and he was holding a 40mm Glock against his chest with his left hand. The 911 call that explained Tommy's actions did not necessitate a thorough investigation to identify a suspect, but the police still sought some proof to establish Tommy's guilt. The police learned that Tommy was a Princeton graduate who had never been able to secure steady work from Shelley's claims. Tommy had experienced an opulent life as a pampered son. His preference was more for clubbing and surfing than he was for inheriting and running his father's company. His father reduced his weekly allowance from $1,000 to $300 just hours before the murder in an effort to instill some independence in his son. This fact showed up as a potential reason why he would kill his father. Tommy had been dealing with mental health issues, and Shelley informed the police that he might not have considered the repercussions of his actions. Tommy showed symptoms of obsessive-compulsive disorder as a teenager. Doctors later believed he might have been schizophrenia, but he refused assistance, frequently ignoring family texts and phone calls. But Shelley's declaration alone was insufficient to shield her son. The New York Police Department launched a manhunt almost once, and 6 hours after Tommy's death, police were able to locate his Chelsea apartment using his cell phone. Tommy astonished them by knocking on his door and being so nonchalant about it. In addition, he informed the police that he was speaking with his lawyer on the phone when they came. Following his arrest, Tommy faced charges of murder and unlawful possession of a weapon. Detectives interviewed Tommy's relatives and acquaintances and learned that he was accused of setting a fire at a home owned by prominent banker Peter Smith Sr. in the Hamptons back in 2014. There were no accusations made against Tommy. Tommy and Peter Smith Jr., the owner's son, were friends before they fell out. Investigators also learned that Tommy had purchased his own firearm online a few months before the murder and had to drive all the way to Ohio with it because it was against the law to mail it. In the months preceding his father's death, the authorities also examined his computer and discovered that he had been looking for websites such as .com and .com. Based on the available information, Tommy appeared to be experiencing symptoms of a mental illness. But his day was not going to get better. A person must comprehend the charges against them, be competent to participate in their own defense, and understand how the court system operates in order to be deemed legally capable. It is possible to find someone competent to stand trial even if they suffer from a severe mental disease. And Tommy experienced precisely that. Tommy's defense team said that his mental state was deteriorating while he was being held in detention and that he was unable to stand trial. Tommy developed depression, psychosis, paranoid illness, and schizophrenia, according to the testimony of 3 doctors and a psychologist who were called to testify. The defense experts added that he harbored hostile thoughts toward his father as a result of his delusions. Nevertheless, the trial started in 2019 after the prosecution also engaged a medical expert who deemed the defendant fit to stand trial. Shelley Gilbert, the son's mother, testified in court that her son had not acted out of retaliation or money grubbing, but rather that he had become so mentally ill that he was unable to comprehend that what he had done when he shot his father was wrong or illegal. Mr. Craig Ortner, the chief prosecutor, refuted the statement. He added that when Tommy placed the gun in his father's hand to give the impression that he had committed suicide, he was completely aware of the circumstances. Tommy also demonstrated how well he grasped the repercussions of his actions by calling his attorney before the cops had located him. Shelley implored the magistrate to commit her son to a mental health institution. She informed them that his father would have also desired for him to be given another chance. But that was not going to occur. For 5 weeks, Mr. Ortner painted Tommy as a resentful son who went to Ohio to purchase a pistol he saw on Facebook and allegedly planned to kill his father. Tommy's claim of insanity was rejected, and on June 28, 2019, he was convicted guilty of second-degree murder and 2 counts of possessing weapons. And on September 27, 2019, 2 months later, he received a sentence that carried a maximum of 30 years to life in jail. He'll be 65 years old when he becomes eligible for parole. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with us. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps us bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like us to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.